And hello.
I'm Milo.
And I am the Moose.
This is the show where we're going to talk about what everyone's thinking.
But too afraid to say.
That's right. So today's topic, do you want to go ahead and introduce it?
I will gladly introduce it. Milo is very likely going to die today.
We hope that doesn't, well, I hope that doesn't happen, but I think it's a great topic.
I think it's a good topic too. So,
Yeah.
we have had this debate numerous times, and of course, I've been the slamming victor every single time of it's about a book that Jesse's read called Love Wins. And so that's the reason for the title, hashtag Love Wins. And it drives me crazy every single time he brings it up because I think it's the absolute worst idea ever. So that's why it's versus Milo Dies.
And
Because
on the flip side, I think it's one of the best books ever written.
so we are this one could get a little fiery. We're just glad that we're not physically in each other's presence because then this would turn into a WWE match. Okay, so why don't you start with
Sure.
talking about the basic premise of the book and what you think about it?
Sure. So the basic premise of the book, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with any of Rob Bell's other books. He bounces around a lot, so it's actually difficult to give a concise, this is what the book's about, because
Hmm.
he covers a lot of different topics. He does this in all of his books.
This
He,
makes
he
me
kind
hate
of
it even
writes.
more.
It's very non-linear, you could say. Like if you like a writing style that's goes from point A to point B to point C, then this book you'll want to throw it at the wall, not because of content, but because of style. Um, that being said, the general gist of the book is that God's love. I'm going to sound super cheesy in saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. God's love is greater than our capacity to reject, our capacity um, to lose salvation. You could say God's love wins. That's the thought behind it.
Oh, it drives
That
me so crazy.
it's basically the idea of universal salvation in a nutshell. And I realize when you say it like that, automatically
You
it sounds
realize how
like,
blasphemous it sounds.
well, it sounds based on what we've been raised to believe growing up
Hmm.
that there's this idea of eternal heaven and eternal hell, and based on if you've accepted Jesus, you will go here, and if you haven't, you will go here. And that's the standard Christian doctrine, standard Christian mantra, and has been for 2,000 years. Rob Bell, in my opinion, does a pretty good job of dismantling that idea, and he puts forth the notion that love wins and that everybody's safe. I mean, it sounds heretical, but if you take the time to read the book, as I have, it's actually a rather convincing argument. And I'm not saying that I buy into it 100%, but it's pretty darn compelling if you read his reasoning behind it.
So, how does he deal with the scriptures that all that seem to speak contrary to the idea?
He doesn't necessarily address those. I'm just going to be honest. He more presents a counter argument saying that there are scriptures that indicate the opposite. And more than that, he looks to, I guess you could say, the big picture of the scriptures, which is that um, Jesus didn't come, Yeshua, he uses Jesus, didn't come to bring hopelessness. He didn't come to bring a message that if you don't believe things this way for this period of time at the exact, if you don't say the sinner's prayer using the right language,
Hmm.
that you'll spend eternity in hell. That's not the message of hope that the Messiah came to bring. The Messiah came to bring a message of hope that he was the redeeming blood for the whole world and that the whole world will be saved through him. And he takes it to the next level that says that everyone will be saved through him. So he doesn't necessarily answer, because there are scriptures in question. I'm sure I could think of a few off the top of my head that, where the worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched, so on and so forth.
Right. But even
Uh,
those scriptures, I don't necessarily see as having to one word or another towards that concept. I want to see if I can look up this thread. We kind of touched on this topic a little bit on
yes,
a mutual friend Gary's page, and there were
Gary.
Gary. Uh,
Look what you've done now, Gary. I think this
which
is our
which
first shout out
actually
for the
that
show. That's great.
yeah, which actually his thread where we brought this up was the catalyst for this next topic, or for this
Right.
with the show we're doing now. course, this is work. So you can go ahead, keep sharing some more of your idea. I'm going to scroll down through here and see if I can find this.
Sure. So one thing I will say before having read Loved Ones, I have not believed in the idea of eternal hell or eternal damnation for I mean the majority of my faith. About 10 to 15 years ago, I went from being a you could say nominal Christian. We might have talked about this briefly on the last show, our testimony in our faith. I went from being a nominal Christian where I didn't have much of the grounding or understanding in anything to being very vocally and radically passionate about what I believe. And in that transition, I read the Bible cover to cover numerous times. I just was in love with it. And I walked away from it with the idea that hell was a complete fabrication of the, and I don't want to offend any Catholics out there because I don't like to offend people in general, but hell was a fabrication of the Catholic Church to abuse people in tithing.
Right.
And I don't know where you're at on this. I think we've talked about it briefly, but
I don't think we're too far off on the topic. Like I seriously question our Western Christian concept of hell. You know, that
right.
the hell that the Catholic Church teaches of where there's all this suffering, which they really, I think, pushed the way they did to try to get people to cough up money.
Right. It's a very powerful means of control. I mean, if you look at how religion has been used in the majority of the world for 2,000 years, it has been a means of control. And, you know, I don't think that's necessarily a good thing by any means. One of the things I love about America being the separation of the church and state, even though I'm on the side of the church, so to speak, I like that it's personal choice and not the will of the government being forced.
Right.
You know, side note. But, you know, this idea of eternal hell and eternal damnation and thrust on people for actions committed in a very finite life, it doesn't seem to be in the character of a just God. And so that's one of the things that I have believed for a long time. And then Rob Bell echoes a similar concept in the book that I think, you know, we agree on this, maybe we agree on more. And so I read more of it. I love the book. One of the three greatest books ever written.
God, no. For some reason, I'm getting some bad feedback on my mic. I don't know what's going on. Like, there's something wrong with the cord. For some reason, every time you talk, it makes my mic jump on the screen here. It's annoying.
I wonder if your mic is picking up your headset.
It's got to be something like that because you could hear it on when I was playing the audio before.
Yeah.
So, apologies to everyone if this sounds horrible. It is what it is today, I guess. We spent like 20 minutes or half an hour trying to get the stupid audio to work right, and this was the best we could come up with right now. I'm just going to blame it on Milo here because, you know, he doesn't have the cool headset that I have.
Blame it on the heretic.
All right. So, I don't necessarily disagree with the idea of the burning for all eternity being something that I can't really find in Scripture. I mean, we know the parable about Lazarus and the rich man, and, you know, that gave an indication that the man was in suffering and wanted to even have just a drop of water to help ease his suffering. And then a consciousness that he had there of wanting his brothers to be warned. But I tend to lean towards the idea that at the end of days when Messiah returns and there's the judgment and everything, that the wicked are just burned up. They cease to exist essentially. And I don't know if that's true or not, and that's something we can explore on a future show. But laying that aside, the idea of everybody being saved, regardless of where they are in life, it just doesn't ring true. It's not something I can find in Scripture. Really, it negates the whole point of Scriptures. If God's love is enough to supersede every single act of man, then the Scriptures are completely useless. Like, why even bother giving us the Scriptures? Like, you could give ideas, say, hey, you know, this is something that's good for you to do, but it doesn't really matter if you do it because, well, I'm gonna save you guys anyways. So I think that concept really does go against the main idea behind the Scriptures. There's no reason for any of it if our actions don't matter.
See, I would say in response to that the Scriptures were given for life on earth as we know it here today. We keep Torah not for salvation because Torah isn't our salvation. At least that's how I feel. We keep it because that's simply how God said to live. Same with the rest of the commandments in the Bible. I'm sure we have listeners who don't necessarily uh, follow the same path as we do about Torah necessarily, but let's just talk about the Gospels. Doing unto others as you would have others do unto you. There's very simple, like, be a good person type rules. Those are for life in the here and now. Those are to get us to make this world a better place. And that's another thing that he talks about in the book is we think of heaven as this otherworldly, this is how the church has taught heaven for 2,000 years, as this otherworldly place that what we do in the here and now is really immaterial, because as long as you say the sinner's prayer, as long as you believe the right thing, then you're going to get a ticket into heaven in the future anyway.
But that's basically what Love Wins teaches too.
Love Wins teaches the opposite, that it's our responsibility to bring heaven to earth.
It's even a lower responsibility because you don't even have to say the sinner's prayer. You're in. Come on.
Right. Well, the point being that heaven is not an otherworldly experience. Heaven is life on earth, but better. And that's something I've also believed for a while, that, this is something that I was challenged in my teenage years. Find one verse that tells you that you will go to heaven when you die. You won't find one. What you will find is that there will be a renewed earth when you die, that life on earth will continue. That's, I probably sound like a Jehovah's Witness here because that's basically my thing, but it's true.
And I don't necessarily have an argument against that. I mean, I'm still looking around for a stone to throw at you. But
it's the idea is that we bring heaven to earth, and that's truth be told, that's actually very similar to how heaven and hell are taught in Judaism. That's the other thing I loved about the book is, although Bell doesn't come out and say this, if you listen to an Orthodox rabbi teach about heaven and hell, it's very much earthly concepts. When there's a few words in Hebrew that refer to hell, Gehenna, Sheol, so on and so forth. They're not referring to like an underground abyss of fire and torment. They're referring to the garbage heap. They're referring to like the area outside of the city where they would burn the trash. Like literally.
Yeah, but I mean that's just using human terms to teach spiritual concepts. That's not necessarily saying that they're earthly things.
I think it is an earthly thing. The idea that there's this video, maybe I'll try to link it in the thread or something later, where an Orthodox rabbi taught what happens to the soul after it dies. Well, the soul doesn't die. A soul can't die. The soul is borrowing the body, and if it gets back to heaven, I'm condensing like a 2-hour message into like 30 seconds here. When it gets back to the place of the soul, whether you want to call it heaven or hell, whatever, if it comes back having performed good on earth, then it comes back smelling like a soul. That's heaven. If it comes back having performed death and destruction on earth, it comes back reeking like a body. That's hell, because it's embarrassment. It's not covered in the good deeds that it was supposed to have performed on earth.
I don't even know what that means. But even that, it's still contingent on our actions. If you don't do the right actions, you come back in the wrong way. So you're still not getting to the message of love wins. You're just teaching the concept of actions matter.
Sure. Actions matter for the here and now. Absolutely.
But what does that have to do with what you were just talking about, how you're coming back? Either smelling like a soul or like a body butthole or something.
Reeking like a... You have to keep in mind, I condensed it. It was a very, an incredibly epic 2-hour message. I'm afraid I didn't do it justice. It's something everyone should watch, honestly. But the idea being that I think there's two concepts going on here. One, do actions matter? And two, what does that mean for the afterlife, I guess, if I would sum it up.
Well, I guess we just kind of have to focus here. We've got to shelve the ideas of what is the afterlife and how does that, what does that look like for us, and just focus on what we're doing now to get to that point and whether or not that matters. And so, what is the point of doing good or living righteously if it doesn't have any sort of effect on the afterlife? Because, like, for example, there may be times it's just easier to steal something than to go work for it. There may be times it's just easier to not put up with someone and kill them. So what's the point of doing rightly if it doesn't actually have an effect on our eternity? If it's not, if I, because what it sounds like is Love Wins is teaching the concept that you only do good as a matter of making your current life better. And is that,
Yeah.
am I understanding that right?
Not your current life necessarily, but yeah, to some degree. I mean, the idea, yes, I think
So,
that's a shallow way to put it, perhaps, but yes.
so I'm saying, what in the Love Wins scenario, what is the point of doing anything good if it doesn't have an impact on how you end up? Like, why play by the rules if you're still going to win the game?
Because it's the right thing to do.
But why the hell do I care about what the right thing to do is?
I think that's the point right there. I think that if so, I have to answer the question with a statement from the Talmud. Um, I believe it was Antigenes of Stoko taught that you should never keep Torah, do the right thing, whatever you want to call it, as a servant expecting a reward. You should do it simply. I wish I could get his exact verbiage. It's in Perkei Avot. You should simply do it because it's the right thing to do. Do it and let the fear of heaven be upon you. Do it because it's right.
But why would the fear of heaven be upon you if there's no consequence if you don't do it?
I would say, why would it be upon you? Because you care about what's right. Hopefully, I
See,
think that there's something
I think what
ingrained
you're
in us to
doing,
know what's right.
and this is something I noticed last time when I was going to bring it up. I didn't bring it up at the time because I wanted to save it for the show. When you were talking about like this idea of his love being enough to save everyone, uh, I really think that that is best illustrated in Yeshua's parable about the man that's going out and hiring people to work for him. Okay? Because he goes out and he hires people in the morning, he goes out and hires people midday, and he goes out and he hires people just before the end of the day. And then at the end of it all, he gives all of them the same amount. And some of them were all pissed, saying, you know, well, why is he getting as much as I did? He didn't work as long.
Sure.
And he's saying, hey, this is mine. I can do with it what I want, and I want to pay them the same amount. That
Sure.
concept I do believe in, but you have to remember that every single one of those people were working for him. They actually
Sure.
did something with their actions. And so if Love Wins was true, then the parable wouldn't say he goes out and hires people. It would say he went out and everyone he saw, he paid a day's wages because, hey, it was his to do with and his love was enough, his money was enough to pay everyone he saw. But he didn't. He
Right.
only paid those who came to work for him. And I think that that parable in itself is a huge blow against the concept taught by Love Wins because you had to work for the man in order for him to pay you for a full day.
Hmm. True. And like I said, I'm not like 100% sold on this concept. So if there's things like that that need to be amended, I think that that needs to be addressed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that I don't necessarily think it disproves it. I think it just creates other problems. Like, what about the people who weren't working for him? You know, what about the? We have to understand this is a parable. This isn't an exact truth. This is a conveying a concept.
Yeah.
Obviously, not everyone in the world does work for him. I mean, we have like to put this in tangible, real life terms, and this is kind of a scenario he talks about in the book. We have remote tribes in other parts of the world that have never heard and have no concept. They have a vague notion that there's a creator somewhere out there. They probably believe that it's a pantheon of deities because many of them do. If the responsibility is on missionaries to take the word there, then we're responsible for their eternal salvation, and we haven't done our job. Let's just say.
Mm-hmm.
That's a scary place to be. That's a scary place to be for the recipient of the message who may never receive it,
Right.
and a scary place to be for us, the responsibility that we're not doing.
Right. But I mean, there is truth to that because you see that mentioned. I think it's in Ezekiel where it's a watchman's job to warn the people. If he doesn't, their blood is on his hands. But let's also be honest and let's go right back to the beginning of time, back to Torah. I mean, who was preaching the gospel to Abraham? God Himself spoke to Abraham. So I mean, if God can share Himself with Abraham, then He can share Himself with the pygmy tribes down in New Guinea. You know, they'll know who he is. And even Romans, I think it is, where it talks about this concept, you know, the creation itself is evidence of God, so that we're without excuse. You can see that there's a creator. You may not know his name, you may not know what his commandments are, but that doesn't mean that you're not falling into the category of maybe the person that's coming into work at the end of the day. If you still are, you're able to see that there's a God, and therefore you're able to respond. I think, and that could still be a separate issue from what Love Wins is talking about, because that could be talking about people that just don't know, and that may be a completely different category from the parable. But it still doesn't really address the idea that our actions don't matter. God's going to save us no matter what. But additionally to that, there is an element of truth, in my opinion, to this concept, because his grace does cover us. All of us are guilty. All of us aren't doing what we should be doing, and we haven't for our entire lives. So we are accountable for that, and we deserve death, the wages of our sin. So there is an element of truth to the idea of love wins, where he's going to save these people in spite of themselves. But I don't think that he's going to supersede people's choices in their life. If they choose to reject him, that's their choice. And in that thread, you pointed out the scripture that every knee will bow and every tongue confess.
One of my favorite ones.
But even in my mind, that still doesn't suggest where people are before him, because lots of times people will bow to someone they hate. You're simply bowing to them because they're greater than you are. It doesn't say that means they have a relationship with him or they're saved by him. It means they're being forced to admit, yes, you are God, you are the ruler, and I have to subject myself to you. I mean, we know at the very least that the scriptures teach that Satan and his angels are the ones that are going to be thrown into the lake of fire. But then we have to couple that with the verse that says every knee will bow and every tongue confess. So wouldn't that include Satan and his angels? They'll have to bow their knee and confess with their tongue that he is God, and then they're still going to be thrown into the lake of fire.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you look at like Paul says in Romans, that if you confess with your lips that Yeshua is the Lord and believe with your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. I'm just reading off my screen here. And then you look at Philippians 2, every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ, Yeshua Messiah, is Lord, the glory of God the Father. To me, I think that we're only seeing part of the picture, and I think that's part of what Love Wins is getting at, that salvation is God's responsibility, it's not ours. And how he does it is really up to him, in my opinion. You know, I personally like the idea that that after this life, people get a second chance. And that's purely speculation on my part. I don't know that.
Right.
But to me, it seems logical that a just God who is going to judge you based on this criteria would give you the option to actually pick those criteria.
Right. But I don't think you have to have a love win scenario in order to say that God gives you a chance to accept or reject him. I think
Explain.
Well, if someone did go through their life and not have a real opportunity to come to know him, then why couldn't he, after they die, give them the opportunity to do that?
Why wouldn't he give that opportunity to everybody? Because there's many people, even in Western cultures, that the only Jesus that's been preached to them has been one that's not the Yeshua of the Bible.
And I understand that, but I'm not saying he only does it for the tribes. I'm saying he can do it for anyone on the planet, give them the chance to come to know him. But here, this brings up another problem. If you're saying he needs to give them another chance after they've already died, isn't that sort of limiting him as being able to do it while they're alive?
I think he could do it while they're alive, but I think that life on this earth is ours. I mean, in the garden, the very first thing that, of course, this is, you may disagree here, but one of the things that happened, I believe, in the Garden of Eden was a legal transfer of ownership of this universe into the hands of Adam. Of course, what's the first thing he did? He gave the deed of land ownership over planet Earth to Satan.
Yeah,
right. I mean, that's like
pretty much agree with that concept.
Yeah. So in this world, I believe that man has authority. I think that ultimately God is the ultimate authority. but I think that there's precedence to say that this world, we are the rulers of this world, and it's our job to make it a better place, to bring heaven to earth, so on and so on, the things we were talking about earlier. But God could reveal himself to the remote tribes, let's say. Um, but I don't believe that he does interfere in life.
You're saying it's our responsibility to do that.
Absolutely.
So if it's our responsibility, then why is he getting involved in giving us salvation at all?
Because we would be absolutely hopelessly lost if he didn't help to some degree.
But that still doesn't answer the question. If the problem is ours, then the problem is ours.
I think him helping even just a little bit is going significantly above and beyond the realm of what he's legally responsible to do, I guess.
I don't know about legally, but I do believe that the help that he gives is based on his nature. He doesn't. I mean, it's just an automatic expression of what his nature is, and that's
because he's good
to save what he loves. Yeah. So
because he's good.
I feel like we're getting off topic a little bit. We're going down a rabbit hole.
It's a very broad topic. That's why
it is a very broad topic. This is a big one to kind of take on because we have to dive into all these other ones and kind of give a little more footing to this thing.
Right. It's a complicated thing, and he doesn't come out and blatantly say any one thing necessarily in the book. But like I said in the beginning, he's very nebulous in how he describes things. The one thing that he does point out...
nebulous.
Oh my goodness. The one thing that he does point out that I appreciate, just because I'm a history nerd, is he talks about how this idea is not new to the Christian faith, that early in the days of...
Neither is child sacrifice, but I mean, hey.
Well... Okay.
Just because it's old doesn't mean it's good.
Well, that wasn't necessarily part of Christendom. I mean, I'd like to think it wasn't, at least. But he points out that several of the early church fathers taught this idea that in the end, all flesh would be saved because God would redeem everything. The restoration of all things is how John puts it in the Gospel. Mm-hmm. And several church fathers, even up to the time of Martin Luther, which, believe me, I'm not advocating Martin Luther, but even up to the time of Martin Luther, they believed it was at least possible that when God says that he will, the restoration of all things, that it means the wayward souls. That I think this is honestly where they get the idea of purgatory, whatever, the Catholic idea of purgatory. It's actually a Jewish idea, but they hijacked it like they hijacked everything else.
Rude.
It's true! I don't mean to be rude, it's true.
No, I mean rude of them.
Oh, true. Yeah. Cheers.
They've been Damn it. I keep forgetting that I can't turn away from my microphone and cough. It's still right there.
Yeah. I know I do need to get a better mic. I like the setup you have there.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. All right, so what scriptures do you see as supporting this idea?
The two that I mentioned earlier, the Romans 10, where if you believe and confess, and then couple that with every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. That's the biggest linchpin for me.
But what about the scriptures that talk about where he says, yes, even the demons believe and tremble?
Bell addresses that in the book, but because he bounces around so much, I'd be hard-pressed to pinpoint it or to even find his conclusion on it. I would say that there are certain things I don't necessarily have an answer for.
Yeah. This is the other thing, too. Like, if you say that your actions don't matter in the effects of salvation and God just is going to say it's okay to everyone, you really kind of take away you belittle the suffering of people, I feel like. If what you do to me doesn't really matter, then all my suffering doesn't matter either. There's never going to truly be recompense for that.
I'm not opposed to there being an idea of I don't know. This is one thing that I've personally toyed around with, so I'm not saying this in a love wins, promoting the book aspect. Mm-hmm. But I have wondered myself if the idea that this life is a training ground for the world to come, and that the actions that we have in this world determine our placement, you could say, in the world to come.
I do agree with that, actually. I really do agree with that.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important that we pursue righteousness
Sure.
adamantly, because the scriptures do teach about the idea of, the things that we're building, it's going to pass through the fire. We're going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And that's why I put that in our first intro. Everything we
Right.
do is going to stand before the judgment seat of the Messiah. It's either going to be
Right.
burned up or it's going to stand forever. And that's,
Right.
I can't remember where it is. I think it's Romans that teaches about that concept. And some will be saved as one through fire. In other words, everything about them is going to be burned up. So the whole goal of this life is to chase after God, to chase after righteousness as hard as you can, because everything you do is going to be transforming your nature into his nature. Everything you do to pursue him is going to be transforming your nature, and everything in your nature that's transformed into his nature is going to be the only thing that survives into the next realm. And I guess you
Sure.
could even say that goes into my idea of the wicked being burned up at his return, because there is a verse that talks about the wicked being burned up in his presence or something. And
Yeah.
so if you spend your whole life pursuing wickedness and there's nothing of God in you, when you stand before him, everything's gone, and not even you will be saved. But if you come in at the end of the day and you're working for the master, you'll still get that wages, and you'll pass through into eternity.
See, I'm going to throw a curveball at you here. I think that idea, everything that you just said, I think the entire idea of that is not necessarily biblical, for the reason that man was created in the image of God. So even if you pursued wickedness your entire life, you, by nature of being a human being, are still created in the image of God.
We were
And
created in the
certainly,
image of God, but we fell.
yeah, but we're still created in the divine image.
We are created in his image, but sin is not his image.
No, but we are not sin. We are human beings. We are, I mean, we're human. We're, I don't know the
This is the problem with that concept. Our nature loves to sin. God's nature can't sin. And so we are no longer in his image, in his nature, in our current form. We actually have to be transformed. That's why we have to have the mind of Christ. We have to be transformed into him. Once we fell, the whole game board changed, and we were no longer in that place. We love sin. And as
so
we
this
spend
is
time with him, then he transforms us into his nature, and we stop sinning, and it's time for this mortal to put on immortality.
so this is where I think that Messiah came to be a living example of what the ideal human would be.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, if you look at Paul talks about him being the second Adam. Adam was supposed to be the ideal human. Adam was supposed to be. We were all supposed to aspire to be.
Exactly.
Dropped the ball fairly early in the game, right? I mean, just
Yeah.
to be honest.
As soon as he was
Um,
handed the ball, he dropped it.
Yeah. What do I do with this? Dropped it. Um, but I think that the Messiah came to be the example of what Adam was supposed to be, and I'm sure I'm going somewhere with this. I'm sure but I think that doesn't. Oh, here it is. Just because we have something to aspire toward, just because we have a goal in life, you could say, doesn't. We have an example doesn't change the fact that we are at our root nature are still created in the image of God. Even significantly post creation, post fall, you have God telling Noah, "You shall not slay man, or man shall not kill other man, because man is created in the image of God." And this is just after man has been horribly wicked and cruel and depraved, and God had to wipe out most of humanity. He's still setting that precedent that you shall not kill other man,
Yes, and I understand
because they're made in
that.
the divine image.
I understand that, and I guess there is an element to that. But what I guess I'm still saying is, even though we're created in the image of God, I mean, he still destroyed everyone in the flood. So being burned up or being destroyed isn't negated by us being created in his image.
Now, truth be told, I don't think that most of the people living on planet Earth at the time of the flood were genetically human. That's probably a totally different.
Say that. Sorry.
That,
Say that
that
again.
that's a tinfoil hat conversation.
Say that again. I didn't hear you.
I personally, I don't believe that the majority of people living on planet Earth at the time of the flood were genetically human. But that's a tinfoil hat conversation.
This is why I love him, because we're not far off on that one.
And yet, you're not into the Book of Enoch, and I believe it should belong in the Bible. So that's fascinating to me.
I
But
actually
anyway.
am not necessarily against the Book of Enoch. I think it's the Book of Enoch that says this is intended for a future generation.
It says it's intended for those keeping the Torah, living in the last days. Do with this what you will.
Yeah,
But
that's going to be another interesting topic to address in
yeah,
the future. But I don't think we're hugely on opposite ends of the spectrum concerning that book.
yeah, that's for sure. So one of the things you said, the last thing I guess I would respond to, and one of the things you said earlier is um, the idea that if what we do doesn't matter, then what's the point of salvation? And that's I'm like heavily paraphrasing what you
Hmm.
said. Um, but what's the connection between what we do mattering and salvation? And personally, I don't think that there is a connection. I don't think that there needs to be. I think we do goodness for the sake of goodness, and I think that God does goodness for the sake of goodness. And God's goodness is saving us, and our goodness is fixing
That's
the world.
such nonsense. And everywhere throughout the New Testament teaches against this idea, because it says that if we continue to sin, there remains no more remission for sins. If someone dies without mercy, according in the book of Hebrews, if someone dies without mercy because they've sinned against the law of Moses, how much more the one who is what is it? How is it worded? He treads the Son of God underfoot and considers his
Right.
blood an whatever a disgusting thing.
I
You know,
think that there is precedent for there are a handful of things I think that are extremely grievous to God, and I question what
nothing. Go ahead.
there
I'm
are a
getting wound
handful of
up.
things. There are a handful of things that I think are extremely grievous to God. One of those being blasphemy of the Holy Ghost.
Yep.
One of those being misusing the name of God, which we probably have differing opinions on that, but that's okay. Um, one of them being rejection of his son after you've believed, after you've tasted the goodness and the sweetness of everything that Yeshua brings, and then to reject that afterwards, that's pretty grievous. One of them I would add to the list is the slaughtering of God's own people. Like let's say Hitler and the Holocaust. I think that's
Right.
pretty grievous in God's sight. And so, I talk about this book as if I think it's the greatest thing ever because I do think it's the greatest thing ever. Just because of the hope that it brings. I don't necessarily agree 100% with the idea that Hitler is going to be, worshiping God in heaven side by side with me on the next earth. I don't necessarily oppose the idea that there is a category of people, the truly depravedly wicked, um, who will not make it to the next world. I think that that's certainly a possibility. But I think
But so then where do you draw the line? I mean, because Paul killed God's people, but he repented. And this
sure,
is why I think the line has to be drawn at whether or not a person repents. It can't be on how bad their sin was. I think even the blasphemy against the Holy Ghost is a rejection of God. It's someone that refuses to repent, and that's why it's an unforgivable sin. Because if someone refuses to repent, if they refuse the Holy Ghost, then there's no good for them. And this was actually a concept we brought up here when we were doing a Bible study. Is the place in the Torah where it talks about putting to death the rebellious son. And when his parents came, they said, "Our son, he's just a glutton, a drunkard, yada yada, and he will not listen to us." And then so they put him to death. Once you get to a place where you refuse to listen, where you blaspheme against almost, that's when you become unforgivable. That's when you become, nope, it's no good anymore. Just put him to death.
but again, that's for life in this world, in this community, in this here and now. He was a problem to the community. He's
Right.
not a problem anymore. And his own death, if this is just my opinion, for Torah, his own death, the shedding of his own blood, forgave his transgression against the community. That's just my opinion.
Well, that could be a whole different topic to look at, and maybe that's the case. But what I'm just trying to touch on is that idea of when you refuse to come to a place of listening anymore, then you're done. And you even see that in the New
Sure.
Testament too. When you go to a brother with a sin against you and he doesn't listen, then you take two witnesses. Still doesn't listen.
Right.
Then you bring it before the whole church, and he still doesn't listen. Okay, we've exhausted all means of trying to get you to listen. You're not going to, so go. You're done. We're not dealing
Get
with
out
this
of here.
anymore. And I feel like
Right.
that happens in an eternal sense when you blaspheme the Holy Spirit. When you know God's saying something to you and you just absolutely refuse to listen. There's no
That's
forgiveness for
possible.
that because it's a state from which you do not come out of.
That's possible. But again, I would suggest that the amount of people in that category are really, really relatively very slim. There are people who reject out of hurt, and I think that God is ready, willing, and able to forgive that. And I think that's a conversation that God and that individual are going to have in the afterlife.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of subcategories where people that seem to have rejected weren't actually rejecting; they were responding out of hurt, and we don't have to be
Right.
the judges of that. But I don't think that it's true that those are relatively few that reach into this category, because the scriptures say that wide is the path that leads to destruction, narrow is the path that leads to what is it? What is the term? Is it salvation that he says? Or to
Probably.
life. And but either way, he says that this path that leads to where we want to be is narrow, and few be those who find it. So if God saves everyone, love wins, then the path isn't narrow, the path is wide.
But again, I would suggest
It's
that's for
not just
life in this
wide, the
world.
whole universe is this road.
That's right.
And that's
No, again, I would suggest though that that is for life in this world. You want to make the world a better place. God has shown us very specifically how to have the best life here possible.
now
And
you're just
I
starting to
think that,
sound like Joel Olstein or Rick Warren or something. Your best life now.
yeah, but you're not giving me any money, so this isn't worth it. This isn't working for me. No, I think that, you mentioned a few minutes ago, like, where do you draw the line? Personally, I don't draw the line. Personally, I believe that's God's responsibility. And I go to a verse in Jeremiah, I think it's Jeremiah 29, I think, where he says, I will correct you in due measure. Now, clearly, he's speaking to Israel in there in the context of Jeremiah 29. But that one verse, I think, shows the heart of God. He doesn't he doesn't lay on a universal punishment, and he doesn't lay on a universal blessing. He corrects you in due measure. And that's what you see in the book of Revelation. You see, he says to this assembly, you did this right, you did this wrong, I'd like you to focus on. It's more of a performance evaluation of an appraisal. I think that's honestly what the standing before the throne of judgment is going to be. I will correct you in due measure. And
And
I think
I don't
that's a line that
necessarily
God gets.
disagree with that, but is that talking to the whole world or talking to Israel? Because if you're God's people, then you're God's people.
What happens if you're not God's people?
Then it
Or
says
is,
outside the city is where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
or is the whole world God's people?
Ah, no, no.
I think the whole world is God's people.
But that's not scriptural.
Well, sure it is. The world is God's and the fullness thereof.
That's not the same thing.
Totally the same thing. This
God
should be a
has a
topic.
people. God has a
This
people.
God has a chosen people, but God has many people.
He has many people within his chosen people, and he says within his chosen people will be people from the nations.
I don't think.
It says within Ephraim is the fullness of the nations, the
Yes.
multitude of nations. So, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say, too, because, I mean, there are a lot of elements that seem to indicate these ideas that God could be more merciful than we consider him to be. But I don't know that I see that precedent in Scripture per se, because he's really harsh with people at times. I mean, and maybe it's based on the level of accountability, based on that person, how much they knew that he's seems to be harsher. I can't get behind the idea that actions in this life don't matter in eternity. I
I
don't see that.
I think the biggest reason why I actually really like that concept is because it makes the actions that we make in this life genuine. We're not doing them for a reward. We're not doing them.
But
We're doing them simply out of goodness, and
yeah,
that's hugely appealing.
I disagree though that you having that motivation behind it, you do things less genuinely.
Well, it's not genuine. If you're doing it for a reward, it's not genuine.
But everything you do for a reward.
I go to work at a job that I don't specifically like that much for a reward. It's not genuine. I go because it's a legal transaction.
I don't know. I stand very firmly behind a statement that I've made for years, and that is that everybody always does what they think will make them the happiest, and there are no exceptions to this rule.
I feel like I majorly debunked that
No,
because
I
I
mopped
do
the
many
floor
things.
with you.
I respectfully disagree. I do many things that I don't like doing because I believe they're right, not because if I did what
But
made me happy, I would be a very
no,
bad person. I'm
no.
just being
See,
honest.
what you're doing is you're trying to say, if I did what made me happy without wisdom, it wouldn't make you happy because you have wisdom. You know that that's not actually going to make you happy in the long run.
Oh, I think it would.
No, because our actions matter in the light of eternity. Everything we do, everything I do in this life, I'm doing with the mindset of eternity. And that's how we're really supposed to be. Even Yeshua says that he did that for the joy that was set before him. He was looking forward to eternity. That's why he went to the cross.
I think this is fascinating because I think in some roundabout way we're arguing the Christian versus the Jewish interpretation of like eternity or like our actions. I think that's fascinating because that is for 2,000 years Christendom is focused on the end game, and Judaism has been focused on the here and now.
And I think it needs to be a marriage of the two.
Probably.
Because I do think that there is an element within Christianity that is really sort of, what is the word I'm looking at? Self-flagellating? Flagellating?
Self-deprecating?
No, it's that kind of idea of where you're whipping your back.
Oh, yeah, flagellation.
Self-flagellation. There is very much that element in there, like you have to make yourself suffer as much as possible in this life.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's the case, and we even have talked about this in times in the past on topic of things like, I don't know, drinking or something like that. Like the Torah doesn't teach this idea of you can enjoy life. And it needs to be a marriage of those two. You enjoy this life and you do things that you enjoy in this life, but you still need to be looking forward in everything to eternity. And it has to be a balance between those two.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. My only point was that the actions that you take in this world should be genuine. When you when you give charitably to the homeless on the street or whatnot, you do it not because your Father in heaven sees you, even though He does see you and He loves that kind of stuff. You do it simply because it's morally you're trying to help. You're trying to make.
But that's not even what Yeshua taught. He taught.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but Yeshua actually addressed this, and that's not what he said. He said, "Do it because your Father in heaven is watching."
Your Father in heaven is watching.
Yeah, but he actually
discussed
this.
But don't do it for the reward.
But that's
because he rebuked the Pharisees for the same thing. Granted, the Pharisees were looking for the reward from men.
Right. And so he wasn't saying don't look for the reward. He's saying don't look for the reward from men. He said, I tell you the truth, they've received the reward in full.
Personally, I say don't look for the reward at all. Do it simply because it's
I think that even that is kind of a very Catholic Christianese kind of concept. And there's a song, and it's a song that I really like, and Keith Green, Christian singer, sings it. And the line in the song is, when I'm doing well, help me to never seek a crown, for my reward is giving glory to you. And that sounds really pious and nice, but I don't think it's actually scriptural. Because in Revelation, it says that the elders took their crowns and cast them before the feet of the Lamb. And so I remember there was a teacher I saw in this, and he was saying that how many crowns we have directly relates and affects our ability to worship God, worship the Lamb in the life to come. So actually you do want to seek a crown. You do want as many rewards as possible because it's going to affect how you enjoy eternity. And that's even the same thing where he says to think about your reward in heaven. Don't put up your riches here on earth, but in heaven where they won't be destroyed.
And granted, I think there is going to be rewards in heaven. I think that because he blatantly teaches, but I think that if our motivation is to look for that reward, I don't think that that's a healthy or a righteous place to be. I think that if we do good in this world, it should be based on the two principal commandments, to love God and to love others. If we're doing good in this world, it should be either to bring glory to God, which I think is a worthwhile reason for doing good, or it should be to genuinely, legitimately help our brothers suffering. I don't think in any capacity our intention in doing it is, oh, this is going to get me in big time. I think that's just...
Right, no, yeah, and I understand that, but even what you're saying about helping someone genuinely out of the love in our heart, that is a God character.
I don't help people out of the love in my heart. No. I help people because I think it's morally right.
Right, but
just to be perfectly honest about that.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when you help people out of the genuine goodness of your heart, that's God's character, that's God's nature being expressed through you. And that comes through how you live your life and how much you actively pursue Him.
True. I don't disagree with that.
And so, again, that comes in from this concept of pursuing eternity. You don't get that nature without paying attention to eternity, because you understand that there's so much more beyond what we're doing right now. And when your mind is on that, then it starts falling into place here in what you're doing now.
But I feel like if eternity is already taken care of, if that's already put on the back burner, then then it's like you're not looking for a quota to fill anymore. You know what I mean? And maybe that's not everybody's motivation in doing good things. Um, you know, maybe people are just genuinely better than I could be credit for. I don't know. I don't know. Have we gotten anywhere on this topic? I feel like we've talked a lot
We've talked a lot, and
without saying a lot. No, we said a lot. We said a
we
lot.
have said a lot, but I guess
Yeah.
let's jump more onto how scriptural this idea is. And so there was
We
where
might have
was
to
it?
do a part two. I've actually got to get running like very shortly, so we
Okay.
might have to do a part two to this.
Well, screw you, man.
Hashtag love wins versus hashtag Milo's the hero.
What Gary shared on this, he shared Matthew 7:23, and then I will tell them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So if everyone's saved, how can they depart from him?
So Bell actually does address not. I don't know if he addresses this specific passage, but he addresses this concept. So there's elsewhere in the text where it talks about going into everlasting torment, everlasting punishment. Is typically how the verse is translated. Um, he, I actually might be that passage. It's one where he separates the sheep from the goats. The sheep go on to greener pastures. That's not what the text says, but the sheep go on to the good place, and the goats go to everlasting torment, everlasting punishment. Um, Bell's contention is that the Greek there can be translated eternal punishment, or it can be translated that word for eternal doesn't have to refer to eternal, and that's actually very Hebraic. It probably refers to a time, an era, an epoch. And then the word for punishment there can mean trial, it can mean proving, it can mean pruning.
Yeah.
So the idea is not so much eternal punishment, but a time of testing, time of reproof.
Okay, and I can understand that, but I don't feel like that's even coming close to what this passage is talking about. And maybe you can try to marry them together, but I'm not sure. So I don't necessarily have a problem with the idea of God could save a wicked person after he puts them through this period of time where they're punished for maybe, but
Yeah.
that still doesn't necessarily address what this scripture is saying when he says, "Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness." I mean, he doesn't want that. He wants people with the nature like his, and that's even why he set up the principle in Genesis where things reproduce after their own kind, and you
Sure.
have a helper that is meet, that is fit for you. And
Sure.
so the idea that is that God wanted a bride, and in order for him to have a bride, she has to have the same nature as him. And if she
Sure.
doesn't, then she's not going to be a fit for him. So that's why this whole life is happening out before us now. It's us changing from this mortal, carnal nature into his nature and character so that we can be a bride fit for him.
That's an
And
interesting concept. That's a topic for another show.
but that's really one of the basis for why I don't think this idea works, because these people, they just don't want it. And like we've discussed in many conversations in the past, I mean, you wouldn't want a spouse or someone that didn't have the desire of what you desired. You
Sure.
want someone that does have the same desires as you. And
Yeah.
so for him to save these people that have flat out rejected him in this life really even takes away our free will, because it's saying he's going to make you love him whether you love him or not.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily. I have to take a step back and respond to one thing you said first. Is the concept that Yeshua said, "Depart from me, I never knew you." We have to keep in mind that Yeshua was a first century rabbi or a first century teacher of some kind, and the communication style of first century Judaism was substantially different than it is today. No, true. I mean,
Yeah,
seriously, the Bible
I
was
know.
not received by King James on Mount Sinai.
It
You know,
was.
oh my God, in the original English. Yes, let's study
God spoke in
the
King James English.
we study the Oxford Dictionary to understand the original English, right? That was Babylon B. So you have to keep in mind, like when Yeshua says, there's an example where he's teaching, about to fulfill versus to abolish the Torah. That was an analogy that was used in the first century in first century Judaism. If a student, a Talmudic student, went to their rabbi and gave an incorrect interpretation, the rabbi would say, "You have abolished the Torah." They didn't literally abolish the Torah; they just got that part of it wrong. But it was an idiomatic expression, meaning you didn't get that part right.
Okay, so let's hear you explain away with an idiomatic expression what he was saying when he says "depart from me."
Right. I think he's saying you're not correct here. Go get it right.
Ah, that's such crap. That just
No,
takes away the seriousness of anything in this life. Like, if it's just gonna be, oh, go try again. Like, what's the point?
This life isn't serious. It's a testing ground for the next one. Nothing in this life is serious, and yet we have a huge.
Is serious, but it's the only thing that's not serious is you. You're the joke.
You know what's funny is I'm the one saying, it's not serious. This life is really quite temporary. I'm talking in all these lovely, fluffy little words. I'm stressed out 99% of the time. Why am I stressing if nothing's serious? Anyway, I really do have to be running, but I think that we should actually continue this topic on the next show because I feel like we could get somewhere with it.
Oh, you suck. So do we have time for me to go over my announcement? How much time do you have? Do you have like 10 minutes?
I should be in the car going right now, but if I give 10 minutes, I think that'd be okay. Maybe let's make it 5.
5? Oh, you suck.
Okay, let's just do it quickly because I really want to go over this.
All right.
Yeah. I know what your announcement is because really, I get the credit, so go ahead.
All right. So, oh gosh, I don't even know where to start with this. I guess
do you want to hold off, or do you want to go into it?
I'll just say it, and then I'll explain the story behind. All right. So, my wife is pregnant. She's 7.5 months along now. The baby's due on March 4th, just another month and a half away. So the story behind this is kind of a long and involved one that I'm going to try to put in a few minutes right here. So about 1.5 years ago now, we were studying in Genesis 18, and it's the story of when the 3 angels came and visited Abraham and told him that, Sarah's going to have a baby, and then after that they went to Sodom and Gomorrah and destroyed it. So we were reading through it, and let me see if I can find it. Oh, good grief, now I can't. There we go. In verse 10 of chapter 18, it says, "And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son." So when I had read that verse during this Bible study, my mom stopped me, and she said, I feel like, and for those of you who don't know, my wife is named Sarah. It's not spelled the same way. There's no H in her name, but her name is Sarah. She said, I kind of feel like that verse is referring to our Sarah. And so she wasn't real clear on it. My mom has a gift of prophecy. God speaks to her a lot, and sometimes it's not as strong as others. And this time she didn't feel very strongly, but it was enough where it's like, I just sensed something. I really think that this is referring to our Sarah. And so I kept that in mind over the next few months because I'm thinking, it says in like a year, it's saying that he's going to return and she's going to have a son. So I was thinking, okay, sometime in the next 3 months we're gonna get pregnant, and then we're gonna have a baby. And the next 3 months came and went, and there was nothing. She didn't get pregnant. So I'm thinking, okay, well maybe she just didn't hear it, or it was something else. And then Sarah did get pregnant, but it wasn't in 3 months. It was in May that she got pregnant. The end of May of this past year. It was actually the day after Shavuot. Yeah, the day after Shavuot, Pentecost, that was the last day of her last period, and that's when they calculate pregnancy from. So I was thinking, it's kind of weird because it's not a year later. So what does this mean? I couldn't really figure it out. And I was then listening to these chapters on Audio Bible, and he was reading through it, and it stood out to me that he says at this time next year. And so I realized, well, what was the time of year that he said this? Because that seems to be significant to this verse. If you go back to chapter 17, and I'm going to try to be quick on this, but it's really a cool topic. If you go back to chapter 17, he's setting up the circumcision with Abraham. That's when he actually gets circumcised, and he circumcises Ishmael and his whole household. And if you go further in the Torah, when it's talking about the Passover, it says that in order for you to have the Passover, you need to be circumcised. Well then, so we have this circumcision taking place, and the next chapter, you see certain key references in here. You see that Abraham was sitting in the door of his tent. So you see a door mentioned here. Passover reference. He actually says to the messengers, don't pass over here until you've stopped and eaten. And that word Passover is next used in Exodus when it says that God would pass over the houses of Egypt and mete out destruction, which is exactly what happened here. Later, these angels would go and destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. As they go into the city, further on in this chapter and the chapter after, it says that Lot invites them into his house and he gives them a meal of unleavened bread. Another Passover reference. You also see a reference to feet washing in here, which is the Last Supper Passover that Yeshua had with his disciples. And as you're studying through all these things, it really becomes clear that this is talking about the time of Passover. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, that still doesn't really match up with what I was going through, because it was Pentecost that she got pregnant at, not Passover. So then I did a little research, and I'm going to get into some adult terms here. I did a little research on sperm, and sperm take about, I think it's, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, it takes 72 days for a sperm to start to when it's developed. So if you go back 72 days from Pentecost, it brings you right to the biblical New Year, Aviv 1. And so I'm like, oh, that's really cool. That is the time of the year. But then I had a further clarity on this, that you don't get pregnant the last day of your last period. Ovulation usually takes weeks. How long? 2 weeks after the last day of the period. So if you go 2 weeks forward, she would have gotten pregnant 2 weeks after Shavuot. Go back 72 days from that. What do you get? Passover. And so
that's pretty darn cool.
It was really cool. So the word that my mother had received at this time in the next year, Sarah will have a son, came true. And that's also why I believe that this baby that we're going to have, we still haven't had an ultrasound to determine the gender, but I do strongly lean towards this being a male child because of the word that we had received. But it's just a really neat thing. And when I was listening to this on the audio Bible and I had that realization that this was the time of year that he was talking about, I actually started crying, because I realized, yes, God is absolutely true to what he said, and he fulfilled it the way that he said he was going to.
Yeah. Now, let me just, I have to throw this out there and then I have
Yes.
to get running. But the reason why I take credit for this, it's not what you think. So prior to, so Bruce had shared this with me, this idea that his mother said that in this time following year, Sarah will be pregnant. He believed it would happen. And I thought, yeah, I believe it'll happen. I believe in the gift of prophecy. And based on some of the things he shared with me about different things his mother said, I believe it's legitimate. So I took a trip to Israel recently, and anyone who's been to Israel, or anyone who knows people who have been to Israel, can, it's a common occurrence that once you go to Israel and you pray to have children, you have children. That just happens. Mm-hmm. So I made a point of the many things that I had intended to pray for when I went to the Kotel, for the Western Wall, literally the holiest place in the world. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could say, where the temple once stood. You know, I'm touching the holy stones, and one of the things that I prayed for is let Bruce's wife Sarah have a child. And I said, bring this to fruition. And sure enough, I get home from Israel, and not even a month later, he says, "Oh, by the way, Sarah's pregnant." I'm like, "Well, of course, because I prayed at the wall."
Exactly.
I said,
Now,
I'm the MVP here."
yeah, as soon as I told him, he took full credit for this. Now,
Of course.
just realized something, and maybe I'm remembering this incorrectly. What time of year did you go to Israel and pray at the wall?
Passover. Showed up. Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
that's true.
That's really
Yeah.
cool.
No, it was. I was there over Passover.
Yeah.
When you're in Jerusalem at Passover, because that is the place to be at Passover. They blow a. It's not a shofar. It's it sounded like a naval blast of some kind. At sundown on Aviv 14, I believe it was, when the Passover lamb would have been being slaughtered. They send out this blast throughout the whole city, and it's like this just total silence afterwards. The just this feeling of absolute holiness that you can't find anywhere else in the world.
Wow.
It was incredible. Next year in Jerusalem.
Yes.
That's to say.
We're gonna go someday together.
Yeah. My hope is to go in Sukkot here in a few years with you guys. I think that'd be fun.
Yeah.
And we'll invite all of our listeners, except for Gary.
Except
I'm
for
kidding.
Gary.
I like it. Anyway, I've got to get running, but this has been a good episode. And if you were down for it, I think it'd be fun to continue this topic next week.
Yeah, well, I'm sure, because I mean, this is again, it's a highly involved subject, so it's really you can't even properly touch it without touching on 20 other different subjects. So,
Oh my gosh, yes.
to use wonderful phraseology.
So how do we close it out here?
Well, I've got the NVamp music playing, so we're pretty cool right now. I think that it's fair to say that I won this round.
Oh my gosh.
Better luck next time, buddy.
Hashtag Milo wins is going to be the next one.
Milo
Love
is
wins
crawling
and so
on the
is Milo.
ground,
Oh my gosh. Bruised and bloodied up. Okay.
but still alive.
Well, I will see you later, and goodbye to all of our listeners, and I hope you've enjoyed.
Yep, so I'm Moose,
And I'm Milo, and we survived.
and we survived.
And love wins.
And Milo's going to die.
It's gonna be forever, or it's gonna go down in flames. You can tell me when it's over.